On my 60th birthday, my family handed me divorce papers and laughed. I signed them. Days later, I made them wish they'd never underestimated me. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Please stick with me. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner. Richard had reserved our favorite restaurant in Asheville, the same place we'd celebrated our anniversaries and our children's graduations. I'd even baked a cake earlier that morning, thinking my family might surprise me with flowers or at least a small gift. Instead, when I walked into the dining room, their smiles were sharp, almost rehearsed. "Happy birthday, Mom," Chloe said, her tone too sweet. Evan just looked amused. Richard, sitting at the head of the table, slid an envelope toward me like it was a game. "You'll want to open that," he said. I thought maybe it was a card or some papers for one of his projects I used to help with. But the second I saw the words petition for divorce, my stomach dropped. Chloe started giggling. Evan smirked. Richard leaned back, satisfied, like a man revealing the punchline of a cruel joke. "It's time, Ellie," he said. "You've had your run. We all agreed this is best." The "we all" cut deeper than anything. My children, the ones I'd raised, fed, defended. I felt the blood leave my face, but I didn't let them see me break. I looked at each of them, one by one, memorizing their expressions. Then I picked up the pen beside my plate. My hand didn't shake. I signed every page while their laughter filled the room. Richard looked almost confused that I didn't protest. I stood, tucked the papers neatly back in the envelope, and said, "Fine. I'll sign." Then I walked out. Outside, the air was cold and clean. My tears didn't fall until I reached my car. I drove straight to my mother's old cottage on the edge of town. The one Richard always said was too small and outdated. Funny, I'd kept it all these years. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket, staring into the dark, wondering how a family could turn on someone who gave them everything. But between the waves of sadness, something inside me hardened. I remembered every late night balancing the company's books, every design draft Richard took credit for, every client meeting where he called me just the wife. I had saved everything, emails, contracts, bank statements, because old habits die hard. I had built that company with him, and now he thought he could erase me like I never existed. By morning, I wasn't the same woman who left that restaurant. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started going through old files. Somewhere in there was my answer, my revenge, not through anger or violence, but through truth. They thought they'd humiliated me, ended me. But I knew one thing for certain. They had just handed me the pen I'd used to rewrite the ending of my own story. The night I left that restaurant, I drove with no plan, just a need to be far from their laughter. When I reached my mother's old cottage, the place was still and cold, but it felt safe. I hadn't been there in years. The furniture was covered with sheets, the air smelled of cedar and dust, and every creak of the floor reminded me of her voice telling me, "You'll always have a place of your own." I lit a single lamp and sat down, trying to breathe through the weight in my chest. I didn't cry much that night. I thought I would, but my tears dried before they could fall. The silence pressed around me, heavy but strangely comforting. My whole body felt empty, but my mind wouldn't stop turning. I kept seeing their faces, Richard's smug smile, Chloe's grin, Evan's laughter. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the ease with which they'd done it. Like it had been planned for months, maybe years. When I finally opened my laptop, I didn't know what I was looking for. I told myself I just wanted distraction, something to make sense of things. But once the screen lit up, my hands started moving on their own. I opened old folders I hadn't touched in years, business invoices, bank statements, property papers. I had saved everything from the years when I handled the office work for Richard's company. He'd always said I was too sentimental for keeping digital copies. Maybe that sentimentality was about to pay off. As I looked through the files, little details started to stand out. Numbers that didn't match, transfers I didn't remember approving, property deeds that were supposed to be in both our names but weren't. Each discovery felt like a slow stab to the heart. He hadn't just left me, he'd been preparing for this. Moving assets quietly, signing things behind my back, and using our children to witness it all. The grief slowly shifted into something sharper. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I could feel the first spark of determination. Richard thought I was a weak old woman who wouldn't fight back. He assumed I'd pack a bag, fade away, and let him enjoy his new life with his young assistant. He didn't know that I'd built that company with him from nothing. Every client, Every design, every contract had my fingerprints on it. He may have erased my name on paper, but not in proof. I stayed up all night, digging through old backups, downloading statements, saving copies. By sunrise, my desktop was full of folders labeled with dates and notes. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the fog roll through the trees. For the first time in years, I felt awake. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew I had something he didn't: truth and proof. When Richard handed me those papers, he thought he'd ended my story. But as I stood in that quiet cottage, surrounded by my mother's old things and my own memories, I realized something simple yet powerful. I still had everything I needed to start again, and everything I needed to make him answer for what he'd done. Days passed quietly in the cottage, each one pulling me further from the shock and closer to something steady. I spent most mornings with my laptop, going through old files line by line. At first, it felt like sorting through memories, but soon it became clear I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was staring at proof of betrayal. The deeper I went, the more the truth unfolded like a wound that had been waiting to bleed. I noticed patterns that didn't make sense. Properties that used to be in both our names were now listed under Richard alone. I checked the signatures and my stomach turned. They looked familiar, my children's names, signed as witnesses. Chloe and Evan. My own kids had helped him take everything from me. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the scanned documents. The signatures were real. There was no mistake. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. It wasn't just about the money or the property. It was about trust. I had always believed that no matter how much Richard tried to control everything, my children still saw me as their mother, someone worth standing by. But the proof said otherwise. They had taken his side completely, not out of fear, but greed. I opened another folder, design contracts from the company's early years. I'd poured my creativity into those projects, working late nights while Richard took credit in meetings. As I went through them, I found deposits that didn't match the records I remembered. Some payments had been redirected to another company name, one I didn't recognize. Curious, I searched it online. It didn't exist. Then I looked through more documents and found an account number linked to a business registered overseas. The owner's initials were different, but the handwriting in the application was his. Richard had created a fake company to move money from my designs and hide it where no one would look. My chest felt heavy, but the tears wouldn't come anymore. I'd already wasted too much of myself crying over people who never valued me. This wasn't the time for grief. It was time for action. I realized that every document he forged, every lie he told, was a tool I could use. He thought I'd never notice. He thought I was too naive to understand the numbers. He forgot who handled the books all those years. That evening, I closed my laptop and looked out the window. The sun was fading, painting the sky in soft gold and gray. I whispered to myself, "You want a divorce, Richard? Fine. Let's make it legal all the way." My voice didn't shake this time. I wasn't planning revenge for the sake of anger. I was planning justice. If they wanted to take everything from me, I'd make sure they paid for every piece of it in court, under their own signatures. For the first time in months, I smiled, small but real. They thought they'd buried me, but I was just starting to dig them out. I drove into town early the next morning and parked in front of a modest law office I hadn't visited in years. Mark Hastings answered the door with the same dry smile he had when we were young and broke, before life made us careful. He still moved slow, but his eyes were sharp. I didn't waste words. I handed him a neat stack of files and told him what had happened, from the birthday dinner to the envelopes and the quiet drive to my mother's place. Mark leafed through the papers, brow furrowing as he read. He asked precise questions, dates, account numbers, names, and I answered plainly. I had kept copies of everything because I was the one who managed invoices and correspondence back then. That habit, which everyone teased me about, suddenly felt like foresight. Mark tapped a few pages, then set the stack down and spoke without a show of anger. His voice was practical. "This is more than a messy split," he said. "There are signs of deliberate hiding. You could have a real case." We sat at his kitchen table while he outlined options. Litigation, he warned, could be long and ugly, but it could also force the truth out where it mattered. Under oath, with penalties for false signatures and concealed funds. He suggested involving a forensic accountant to follow money trails and recommended we move quietly so Richard wouldn't see us coming. The plan wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It was a careful, legal unraveling of what had been done behind closed doors. I liked the quietness of Mark's approach. He didn't suggest grand gestures or public calls to shame anyone. He wanted evidence gathered correctly, subpoenas prepared, and motions timed so they hit when the opposition least expected them. He would draft papers, consult with experts, and file when the time was right. I would keep living in the cottage, let Richard think I was broken and gone, and let him act free and careless. If he assumed I had disappeared, he'd keep making mistakes. That was our advantage. Before I left Mark's place, we agreed on small steps. First, a forensic accountant would be asked to review the files I brought. Second, we'd quietly ask for copies of corporate minutes and bank statements through formal requests that wouldn't raise alarms. Third, Mark would prepare a confidential demand letter as a warning, but only to be sent when we had everything lined up. Each step would be deliberate, measured, and legal. Back at the cottage, I made the place livable. I brought in a few boxes, arranged flowers, and kept a kettle on the stove like a woman settling into a new routine. I answered voicemail messages in a soft voice and let word spread that I was trying to move on. At home, I practiced appearing small, polite when neighbors came by, subdued in public, so Richard and the children would keep underestimating me. I didn't hide what I was doing, but I hid how much I knew. That evening, Mark called with a name and number of an accountant who specialized in corporate fraud. He sounded confident without being boastful. "We'll follow the money," he said. The plan felt right because it relied on facts, not fury. I went to bed that night with a steady mind. For the first time since the papers were handed to me, I felt like I was inside the driver's seat. I had allies who knew the law, and I had patience. Now it was only a matter of time before the truth caught up with them. A few days later, news reached me through a neighbor that Richard had moved his new assistant, Dana, into our house. She was young, confident, and perfectly at ease in the place I once called home. Chloe had posted a photo online of the three of them standing in front of the house, smiling with the caption, "New Beginnings." Evan had left a comment filled with laughing emojis. It was clear they wanted me to see it. I looked at the photo once, then closed my phone. Their happiness didn't hurt me the way I thought it would. It only made me calmer. Richard's lawyer called the next morning. His tone was smooth and cold, the kind of voice that hides behind fake sympathy. He said Richard wanted to settle things quickly, and asked if I needed help understanding the paperwork. I told him softly that I wasn't very familiar with legal terms and that I'd get back to him soon. I let him think I was confused. He sounded pleased by my hesitation. When we hung up, I almost smiled. Every word I said was part of the act. While I played the helpless ex-wife, Mark worked quietly in the background. He had found a retired tax investigator willing to help trace Richard's financial moves. Together, they uncovered irregular payments and accounts that didn't appear on the official records. I learned about contracts signed under false names, invoices never reported, and funds that somehow disappeared just before the divorce papers were served. Every piece of information was saved and logged. We weren't rushing. Mark wanted it airtight before taking it anywhere near court. I went about my days keeping the act alive. When people from town stopped by, I talked gently about how I was trying to find peace. I even thanked Richard's lawyer for his kindness in offering to handle the sale of certain assets. He probably thought I was broken and grateful. It worked to my advantage. The quieter I stayed, the more careless they became. Richard stopped hiding his new relationship. Chloe and Evan posted about their father's success and how he finally had freedom. Each post, each careless comment, became evidence of what they truly valued. At night, I would sit on the porch with a notebook and list every small clue we found. I didn't think of revenge anymore. I thought of preparation. There was something freeing about not reacting to every insult, about keeping still while others exposed themselves. My calmness made them underestimate me completely. They saw weakness where there was only patience. When Mark updated me on the progress one evening, he sounded almost excited. "It's all falling into place," he said. "They're making it too easy." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the fading sky. I had learned something about power. It's quiet, not loud. I didn't need to shout or threaten anyone. I only needed to wait and let the truth grow roots. They believed they had won, but I knew the storm was just beginning, and I would be the one standing when it passed. I decided it was time to face them. The plan had to look innocent, something that would make them lower their guard. I called Chloe first and told her I wanted to have lunch with her and Evan. My voice was soft, shaky even, like someone tired of fighting. She agreed right away and promised to bring her brother. I could almost hear the satisfaction in her tone, as if she believed I was finally giving up. That was exactly what I wanted her to think. The restaurant I chose was small and quiet, a place where I used to take them when they were kids. When they walked in, they looked polished and comfortable. Chloe hugged me lightly and smiled in that polite way people do when they think they've already won. Evan pulled out a chair for himself and started scrolling through his phone. They didn't ask how I was doing, and I didn't expect them to. "I've had time to think," I began, keeping my voice low. "I don't want more conflict. I just want peace." Their faces relaxed immediately. I told them I was ready to move on, that I accepted the divorce and wanted to make things simple for everyone. I said I'd sign over whatever share I still had in the company so they could focus on helping their father. They exchanged quick glances, surprised but pleased. "That's the right thing to do, Mom," Chloe said. "It's better for everyone." Evan nodded in agreement. I pulled out a folder from my purse, papers neatly clipped together. "These are just acknowledgments," I said gently. "Mark helped me prepare them. Nothing serious, just some legal clarifications." They didn't even read through most of it, only skimmed a few lines before signing. The documents weren't what they thought. Mark had worded them carefully to show that both of them were aware of and involved in the financial transfers Richard had made. Their signatures now tied them to everything. As they signed the last page, Chloe leaned back with a satisfied look. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Mom," she said. I smiled faintly and thanked them for coming. I paid for the meal before they could protest, and when I stood up to leave, I told them I needed some rest. They didn't try to stop me. To them, the conversation was over. To me, it had just begun. Walking out of that restaurant, I felt something lift inside me. For months, I had been living behind a curtain of sadness, pretending to be fragile so they wouldn't see what I was building. That lunch was the last act of the performance. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt the faintest smile tug at my lips. They thought they had secured everything. What they didn't realize was that their own hands had just signed the first page of their downfall. When I got back to the cottage, I called Mark. "It's done," I said simply. He understood without needing details. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in a long time, knowing the pieces were finally in place and that soon, everything they'd taken from me would lead straight back to them. A few days after my quiet lunch with Chloe and Evan, everything was ready. My attorney filed the motion in court, attaching every document we had collected, signatures, fake transactions, and hidden accounts. I had spent weeks pretending to be lost and broken, but now it was my turn to act. The court accepted the motion, and soon after, the IRS and state auditors were alerted. It didn't take long before their world started falling apart. The first sign of trouble came when Richard tried to make a withdrawal from one of his business accounts and found it frozen. Then the auditors arrived at his office, demanding records and files. His staff panicked. The same people who once praised him were now whispering behind closed doors. Phone calls went unanswered, deals were canceled, and clients backed out. The empire he had built on lies began to crack under the weight of the truth. Chloe and Evan were caught in the middle. Their names were on several of the documents, and their signatures appeared alongside Richard's. I knew they had no idea what they were really signing that day at lunch, but that didn't change the fact that it tied them directly to his actions. When they received legal notices, they called me repeatedly. I didn't answer. I had no more words left for people who once laughed while I sat in pain. Richard finally showed up at my cottage one afternoon. He looked nothing like the proud man I had been married to for decades. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes tired, and his voice carried a mix of anger and desperation. He demanded to know what I had done, accusing me of destroying everything he worked for. I listened silently, letting him pour out his frustration. Then I looked him in the eye and said, "You always said I wasn't strong enough to run things. Turns out I didn't need to run them. I just needed to end them." He froze, realizing the full meaning of my words. For years, he had mocked me, treated me like an accessory to his success, believing I couldn't survive without him. Now he was the one scrambling to hold on to what little he had left, and I was the one standing calmly in control. Within days, more financial freezes hit. The company's accounts were locked, their assets placed under investigation. Every corner of his business was being examined. The house, the cars, even personal items, all subject to review. The once flawless Brooks' name became a cautionary tale around town. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching a family destroy itself. But I couldn't deny the sense of justice that filled me. For so long, I had been invisible, treated as if I didn't matter. Now the truth had spoken louder than any revenge could. When Richard walked away that day, he didn't look back. I knew he finally understood that power built on deceit never lasts. And I finally understood that strength doesn't come from fighting. It comes from knowing when to let the truth do the work for you. The investigation kept uncovering one dark secret after another. Every file revealed another lie Richard had buried over the years. The auditors traced missing funds, fake expenses, and unpaid taxes that went back more than a decade. His signature appeared everywhere, proving he had been running a web of fraud long before he handed me those divorce papers. There was no escape this time. Everything he built was coming down piece by piece. The court froze his remaining accounts, and the government seized several properties linked to his fake companies. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth worked faster than revenge ever could. Richard's business partners disappeared overnight, afraid of being pulled into the scandal. The proud man who once walked around town like a king was suddenly treated like a criminal. Chloe tried to distance herself, pretending she knew nothing. But when investigators reviewed the files, they found her signature on documents that helped move money illegally. Her law firm dropped her immediately, and soon after, her license was suspended. She called me once, sobbing that she didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't respond. Some lessons can't be softened with sympathy. Evan's fall came just as quickly. Without his father's backing, the company board removed him. They said his involvement had made them lose trust with clients. He packed up his office in silence, realizing the same arrogance that made him laugh at me was now costing him everything. The mansion, once the pride of the family, didn't last long either. The bank repossessed it within weeks. I saw a photo in the local paper, a foreclosure notice taped to the grand iron gate. It felt strange seeing the place where I spent years walking on eggshells reduced to a headline. Richard tried to stop the sale, but the law had already decided. The more he fought, the more he lost. Dana, the woman he flaunted as his fresh start, disappeared the moment his wealth vanished. She took what little she could and never looked back. It didn't surprise me. The people Richard surrounded himself with only stayed as long as he could give them something. When that power faded, so did their loyalty. When the final judgment came, the court cleared me completely. My records were spotless, and every document I'd kept proved I had nothing to do with his crimes. I was awarded restitution and given full ownership of my mother's cottage. The same small home Richard once dismissed as old and useless was now the only property left untouched by the chaos. I didn't celebrate, but I did feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Everything Richard tried to control slipped right through his hands. His money, his power, even his family, all gone. Standing in the quiet of my cottage, I realized the greatest irony of all. While he lost everything chasing control, I found freedom by letting go. I no longer needed revenge. The truth had already done what I never could. It ended the Brooks empire for good. When Richard showed up at my cottage, it was late in the afternoon. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the porch. I almost didn't recognize him at first. His hair looked thinner, his face pale, and his shoulders slumped. The confident man who once ruled every room now looked smaller, almost fragile. I didn't say anything. I just opened the door and let him in. He stood there for a moment, looking around the cottage. His eyes landed on the old wooden table, the one he used to mock for being too simple. I could see the bitterness in his expression, but also something else, regret, maybe. He asked if we could talk, and I nodded. I went to the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee, and set them down between us. The silence was heavy. Then he started. His voice was sharp, shaking with anger. He said I'd destroyed everything, that I'd humiliated him in front of everyone, that I'd turned our children against him. I let him talk. I didn't defend myself. I didn't interrupt. I'd waited years for him to finally run out of words. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "You ruined my life, Ellie." That was the moment I looked him straight in the eye. My voice was calm, steady. "No, Richard," I said softly. "You did that yourself. I just made it official." He didn't reply. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might shout again. But he didn't. Instead, he looked around the cottage once more, maybe realizing it was the only place left that wasn't touched by his lies. I could see it in his eyes, the weight of everything he'd lost. Not just the money, not just the house, but the respect and the control he'd once had over everyone around him. He muttered something about starting over, about how it wasn't fair that I walked away fine while he lost everything. I didn't respond to that either. Fairness was never part of our marriage. I just told him quietly that I hoped he would find peace someday, even though I doubted he would. When he stood up to leave, he hesitated by the door. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but no words came. Then he just nodded once and left. I watched him walk down the path until he disappeared from view. After he was gone, I sat by the window, the same spot where I'd sat the night I signed those divorce papers. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I looked out at the trees, the fading light, and the calm sky. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Richard's visit didn't bring pain. It brought closure. He came looking for power, but he found the truth instead. I didn't win by fighting him, I won by surviving him. And as the day faded into quiet evening, I finally felt that I had my life back. Months passed, and my life began to feel calm again. The cottage that once felt too quiet slowly became my safe place. I filled it with things I loved, plants, soft lights, and sketches of designs I'd kept hidden for years. For the first time, I worked for myself. I started a small home design consultancy from my kitchen table. Clients came through word of mouth, and soon my days were full of plans, ideas, and honest work that belonged only to me. Mark visited often. Sometimes we discussed business. Sometimes we just shared coffee on the porch in comfortable silence. He never pitted me. He treated me like someone strong, capable, and whole. There was an ease between us that didn't need words. I didn't expect love at this stage in life, but I felt companionship, something I'd never truly had before. I didn't hear much from Chloe or Evan. I knew they were struggling, trying to rebuild what they'd lost, but I didn't reach out. I'd forgiven them quietly, not for their sake, but for mine. I didn't want to carry anger anymore. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired. They just teach you to protect your peace. Every morning, I opened my curtains and looked out at the small garden I'd planted. The air smelled clean, the way it used to when I was young. I realized I no longer felt the need to prove anything, to anyone. I wasn't the woman who needed Richard's approval or my children's attention. I was simply me, and that was enough. When my 61st birthday came, I didn't expect anything grand. I baked myself a small cake, lit a single candle, and sat by the window with my cat curled beside me. The evening light fell softly through the curtains. I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered, "Happy birthday, Eleanor. You finally built something that's yours." It wasn't wealth or revenge that brought me peace. It was freedom, the quiet kind that comes when you stop living for others and start living for yourself. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And as the candle flickered out, I smiled, knowing I had already won. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away and starting over, or should I have tried to fix things with them? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.